Hello, my friends. Hey, in just a few days, we will be joining together for our Christmas Eve special. And man, I hope that you can join us on that, first ever time we've ever done anything like this. And as we approach that day, Christmas Eve, I keep thinking of those words that we sing together every year in the hymn Silent Night. At the very end of the first verse, we sing, "Sleep in heavenly peace." Now, many of us may think very little of those words. We sing them all the time. Others may wonder, what the heck is heavenly peace? I think for too many of us, heavenly peace is, simply a feeling. Singing those words, like so many other things at this time of year, can just kind of put us in a kind of Christmas trance. I know for me, I love the feeling I get every year when we sing on Christmas Eve, Silent Night. Kind of like Pavlov's dog hearing a bell and salivating for dinner. I hear that song and I'm ready for a Christmas feast. Suddenly I'm a small kid again with that familiar feeling. Okay, we're singing that song again. Christmas Eve is almost over. That means I go to bed soon, and the sooner I go to bed, the quicker morning will come, and you know the rest. So there I am every Christmas Eve singing Silent Night with visions of sugar plums dancing in my head. And like so many of us, I love those warm, fuzzy feelings. But I think often I need to be shook out of my Silent Night American folk religion trance. And I know that's not all of us. I know that some of us, maybe you're already shook out of that trance and you're jaded by the hollowness of American Christmas. And then there's still others who, while you may not be jaded about Christmas, every Christmas is a painful event. You're confronted with loneliness, hurt, rejection, grief, injustice, the reminder of the brokenness that's all around us, to which you may ask, Pastor, what good does God have to offer me or anyone else? Christmas? Come on. Forgiveness of sins? Yeah, okay, that's good, but what does that do for how lonely I am? Why can't I have a child? Why can we never have justice? So when we sing "Sleep in Heavenly Peace," that often means little more to us than a meme. But it is so much more than that. So this morning, what I want to do for us is unpack this very biblical idea of heavenly peace. What's it all about? And instead of lulling us to sleep like a Christmas lullaby, I'm hoping that heavenly peace can wake us up and remind us what this good news is all about. Good news that actually reaches the darkest corners and lives of our world. In order to understand what it is, we really need to go back to the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1 when God created all things. Now, I know that people believe different things about how the earth came into being or when the earth came into being, but did you know that that's not what the first two chapters of Genesis are all about anyways? How and when bear little importance on the creation story. Really, why and who are the important questions. And here's something that is very important that we find right in Genesis chapter 1. Right towards the end of the chapter, it says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. That's incredible. Not just because it shows God's character, a God who makes something beautiful and admires the creation that he made and loves it. But more than that, it means that the creation was good. Very good, in fact. Not bad, not could use some improvement, not requiring a fix. It was good. Just take a quick glimpse back at 2020 and you'll know that if creation was very good when God made it, then something's gone terribly wrong. Disease, not good. Compromised politicians, not good. Domestic violence on the rise, not good. Racial injustice, not good. So this is where we catch a first glimpse of heavenly peace in Genesis. Eden was the setting of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and what Eden represented to God's people was a place where heaven met with earth. Everything that was right and perfect about heaven was right and perfect in Eden. Another way to say that is that everything was at peace. Everything was as it should be. That's what peace is. One of the things I've noticed during the pandemic is that our house here in Quincy is often in chaos. And 3 boys in a small city house, we're home all the time. So hard as we may try to stay clean and stay organized, we're always there to keep making a mess. As a result, things at the Sharkey house can often feel a bit chaotic. But the other night, while I was busy with some responsibilities for work, my dear wife, Kathleen, took it upon herself to get our house in order by cleaning and organizing all of our messes. When I came home, I noticed the moment I walked through the door, immediately, that everything was in its place. Everything was as it should be. Our house was at peace. But church, that's what Eden was like. Everything was as it should be. Eden was a place of peace, and it was very much heavenly peace because Eden was heaven on earth. God's people had a word for that heavenly peace, and you've heard it before. It's the Hebrew word shalom. And it means so much more than just a warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when you don't have anything to worry about. And it means even more than just the absence of conflict, though all of those things are part of it. Shalom encapsulates all things that represent the world as it should be. Completeness, wholeness, soundness, welfare, health, human flourishing, safety, prosperity, well-being, justice. Let's consider that last one for a moment, justice. In June, following the death of George Floyd, I went to the march against police brutality that was held in Quincy, where we chanted the same chant that protesters and civil rights activists have been chanting for decades. No justice, no peace. Many people have interpreted that statement as a conditional statement that means, well, if there is no justice in our society, then there will be no peace in the streets. And that is very much what it does mean to many people who have used that phrase over the years. But Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a more theological understanding of justice and peace when in 1967 he said, "There can be no justice without peace, and there can be no peace without justice." King understood the biblical connection between peace and justice. That is to say that they are inextricably connected. They're very much the same thing. Peace is, shalom is, everything as it should be. When shalom exists, there will be no injustice. When injustice ends, we will have shalom. And that is the world God made. Perfectly at peace, perfectly just. But in our world today, things are not as they should be. Even the smallest things call attention to the brokenness that surrounds us. My friend Gerald is an engineer who I met when we were having trouble with water in our basement a couple years ago. We got to know each other as he graciously offered to help us waterproof and finish our basement. During that time, I noticed several moments where Gerald would set down his tape measure and forget where he had put it. I didn't think too much of it because, well, I pretty much do the same thing all the time. He would laugh about it, and he told me that there have even been times when he's lost the tape measure altogether or left it at a job site. Well, one day, Gerald opened up to me, and he said, "Pastor Stephen, do you know why I always lose my tape measure?" "Well, no," I said. He said, "This is what it's like being a black man in America." And he went on to describe to me that he doesn't feel safe carrying his tape measure on his belt like all other engineers and contractors do, for fear that someone might think he's reaching for a gun and hurt him. Can you think of anything less threatening than reaching for a tape measure on your tool belt? But friends, that is not the world as it should be. This is why God's gift of peace is so wildly important for our lives in this dark world, and why it's such good news. It reminds us that all will be put back together the way God intended it to be, the way it should be, just as things were in Eden, when God looked at everything he had made and said, "This is very good." That is heavenly peace. God is a peace-making God. God does not create and establish things that are broken or not at peace. God creates things that are good, things that are as they should be. Let's take a few moments to think back about the world that we live in. What do you see around us that makes you say, things are not as they should be? Let's take about a minute. Welcome back. So God made everything in perfect shalom. Everything was just as it should be. Very good, God said. But it's been a long time since creation has known peace. And we've seen some of the worst of it this year right here in America and beyond. We are experiencing a world that is not functioning as God intended. Global pandemics are not part of God's plan. That's not shalom. But in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the darkness, Scripture makes it clear that the restoration of shalom is God's intent for this world. Peace is a gift that God intends to bring to this world. The Scripture that we read today is so powerful for us in the midst of our darkness. Just like we are experiencing darkness today, the people of God in the southern kingdom of Judah were experiencing deep darkness so many years ago. They were tormented by the constant threat of the Assyrian Empire, who routinely committed genocide and who ultimately ended up wiping out the northern tribes of Israel. Isaiah calls them the people walking in darkness. Anybody walking in darkness today? How many of us are longing for light to shine in the darkness? If you're watching this sermon on Sunday, December 20th, it is the darkest day of the year. Perhaps it's an appropriate literal reminder of the darkness we experience in our own lives. But Christmas is about the coming of light into the world. So listen to the good news that Isaiah prophesies to these people who are walking in darkness. It says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." It's interesting because while that's so beautiful, the verses take an interesting turn next. They highlight the importance of God's gift of peace by showing us what that darkness had looked like. The next 3 verses of Isaiah's poem here are reflections of war and battles, particularly past victories that God's people experienced from many generations before Isaiah's time. And if you do your homework and look back at those battles from the book of Judges, well, they were gruesome affairs. And I know many of you may say, "See, Pastor, this is why I struggle with the Bible." And I get it. There's violence, there's genocide, evil things that we kind of need to progress beyond, right? But I want to challenge us and say that this is actually why I love the Bible, because it's real. It's messy. It's not a neatly manicured depiction of human heroes and happy endings. And what we see in Isaiah 9 is a recalling of the pain, the darkness, the ugliness of war. But particularly what Isaiah is calling attention to is the end of war, the establishment of shalom. Look at these words from verse 5 of Isaiah 9. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. What a powerful image. This is an image of peacemaking. Everything used in battle will be put to a different use, a better use, a peaceful use, fuel for the fire. It echoes back to Isaiah's earlier words from chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, "The Lord will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many people. They will beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not take up sword against nations, nor will they train for war anymore." Church, this is our God, a peacemaking God, the kind of God who takes weapons of battle and turns them into things that cultivate the ground for food. In a few moments, we have the privilege of hearing from a man for whom the words heavenly peace probably mean a great deal more than what we often think of when we sing those words every year. I met Matthew 5 years ago when I visited the Gambela region of Ethiopia. Gambela has been the home of hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees since the outbreak of civil war in the early 1980s. The experience I had in meeting these refugees was so impactful to me, and I've shared with you before about their peacemaking word. But this past week, Pastor Dave and I had the privilege of sitting down for a Zoom conversation with Matthew. I know Zoom drives so many of us crazy, but how amazing is it that we can sit down and talk with somebody in Africa? We had a great conversation with Matthew, who is now the president of the Evangelical Covenant Church of Ethiopia and Sudan. Well, he's the president of a denomination, but Matthew is also a refugee, and he has been for most of his life. This is part of his story.
My name is Reverend Matthew Jong Moses. I am the president of the Evangelical Covenant Church of South Sudan and Ethiopia. Before I came to Gambela, I was a refugee 25 years, and my entire life is almost have been refugees. We had a civil war that lasted for 5 decades. And when the war occurred, there were a lot of bombardment which were carried out into the villages. And one of the village was our village that was attacked in 1985. So several people, including my relative, were killed through the aerial bombardment of the Islamic regime of the north. And we had to flee to the neighboring countries. While we were fleeing, we had a lot of horrible experience, especially on our way to Ethiopia. We spent 1 month walking. I was 9 years old at that time, and some of my youngest siblings were 2, 5, and 7 years. While we were walking, there were a lot of challenges on our way. There was no food. And some of our colleagues were eaten by the wild animal, and some were eaten by crocodile. And some were even died because of hunger. And when we came into Ethiopia, the challenge that we faced was the lack of food. There was no enough food, there were no enough medicine, and the population of the people were so many. And some of our colleagues and some of our relatives died with disease and hunger as well. But by God's help, some of us were able to survive. That's why I'm able to talk to you now. I thank God because He gave me this life that I'm living. And the experience was very horrible, was very terrible, and it was very helpful. That's how we came to Ethiopia. The war broke out again, and that war has killed a lot of people. There were more than 20,000 people who were killed within 3 days, and we had to flee for our lives. And I decided we have to come to Ethiopia again for asylum. So up to now, we did not go back to the South Sudan, but because of ongoing unrest that is going on in our country. So that's what I can say shortly. about my refugees' life. I have experienced a lot of things, a lot of challenges, a lot of many horrible things which are facing me. But in spite of that, I'm also serving the refugees while I'm the refugees. We have decided to sit and do something that can reconcile our people, because most of the people who live in the refugees camp are the refugees live with bitterness. They continue with fighting while they left South Sudan. They fought severely and they kill one another in the refugees camp where they live. So we sit and we decide that instead of us to sit idly while looking at our people killing themselves, why don't we do something? And that came to our mind was making peace among the refugees. While we are pursuing peace, we have to advocate for the justice of those who are being oppressed. So we should not keep silent. We have to advocate, we have to speak on their behalf. When we call the people for peace workshop first, there were not many people who came to us because people perceived that we came as a politician who want to manipulate them to go back to South Sudan or to bribe them with money so that they can live what they have in their heart. So we told them that we are not politicians, we are the peacemakers. The second day we continue with the workshop, the number increased. We started with 50 people. The second day they became 100. And the third day, we were joined by 500 people from different tribes. Wow. And that's how we started. Finally, when we conclude the workshop, majority of the people have confessed. They say, we are sorry for our reservation. Now we have realized that you are peacemakers. Please come again and make peace. And we told them that what we have to do, we have to select committee who should continue peacemaking among your community. We select 20 people from different denominations, from different tribes, and they remain as a peacemaker. So that's how we became a peacemaker. At the moment, we train 5,883 peace ambassadors from different tribes in the refugees camp as well as in South Sudan. We conducted 19 workshops in 5 countries, and we become known to many people as peacemakers, and we, the facilitators, are people from different tribes, and we work for one objective, that is making peace among antagonized tribes in South Sudan. That's how we became peacemakers. We need your prayer and we need your deeds. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Church, I think for everything that we've been through in this past year, it's sobering to realize how much worse life has been for countless people around the globe long before we ever heard of anything called COVID-19. At one point in the interview, you heard Matthew say, "We have experienced many horrible things, and my life has been very difficult, but God has been so good to allow us to survive." Wow. That's remarkable for him to look at the desperateness and the pain of his situation and say, look what good God brought out of it. Some of us may struggle to find that good at all. I tear up every time I hear Matthew share about the survivors from his village walking hundreds of miles to the border of another country where they weren't even sure they would be allowed in. And along the way, they lost their lives to hunger and lions and crocodiles. I think we can agree that things are not as they should be. But what I find so powerful about Matthew's story is that despite all he has been through, Dinka tribes killing Nuers, Nuer tribes killing Dinkas, almost his entire life moving from one refugee camp to another, yet still he strives for peace. He loves and forgives the same people who destroyed his home and killed his family. And he owns the title Peacemaker of God. And that part is particularly interesting to me because it was Jesus who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall become children of God." Of all the Beatitudes, those are the blessings listed by Jesus in his famous Sermon on the Mount. Of all the Beatitudes, peacemaking is the one thing that Jesus ties directly to our being, our identity as God's children. To be a child of God is to be a peacemaker. You hear this in the way Matthew talked about peacemaking. For him, it is intimately tied not to his work, but to his being. Several times you heard him say, "I am a peacemaker." Church, if God is a peacemaking God, his children also will be peacemakers. And in no one is that truth more evident than in the person of God's Son, Jesus Christ. That's what makes our passage for this morning so significant, because it reveals the return of shalom that will come in the person of Jesus. Listen back to Isaiah's prophecy about the coming of Jesus. It says, "This light dawning in the darkness." And he goes on in verse 6 to say, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given." We read this every year at this time of year. "And the government will be on his shoulders." Listen to his names. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The Prince of Shalom, the Prince of Wholeness, the Prince of Justice, the Prince of putting things back the way they should be. That is who Jesus is. And Isaiah goes on to describe the kingdom of this Prince of Shalom in verse 7. "Of the greatness of his government and shalom, there will be no end." Moreover, Isaiah says this government will be established and upheld by justice and righteousness. After our most recent display of politics, I think many of us can agree that a new government is just what the doctor ordered. That a government that's defined by peace and justice and righteousness, that's what we need right now. And by the way, I'm not talking about the new presidential administration. No, I'm talking about a complete renewal of all the broken governments we've ever known. That isn't just good news. That is very good news. God sent his Son to bring the shalom of Eden back to earth so that it might be said once more of all God's creation, "This is very good." God's government is coming. God's shalom is coming. Heavenly peace is coming. Today is the last Sunday of Advent 2020. It is a season of waiting for justice, waiting for the return of Christ, waiting for the establishment of this heavenly peace. But we don't wait idly for these things. Matthew and his work in one of the most war-ravaged corners of our world gives us a beautiful example of what waiting looks like. Waiting for God's coming, waiting for God's peace means engaging right now in the work of being peacemakers. We can work to get our house in order, like doctors and scientists working to fight back against the evil of COVID-19. We can be peacemakers who shape a culture where Black men can put tape measures on their belts without fear, where students aren't crushed under the weight of performance in school, where the pain of loneliness is met with the balm of honest, rich community, where we look at people as fellow image bearers of God instead of whatever party they vote for. So this Christmas Eve, when we sing Silent Night, and we will, when we sing those words, "Sleep in heavenly peace," let's not be lulled into that Christmas trance. Instead, let's wake up. Let's remember what heavenly peace is. God's shalom. Everything as it should be. Before we share in the Lord's table together, I want to share with all of you some special music from a hip-hop artist named Caleb McCoy. Caleb lives right here in Boston, and you can find a link to his music in the description. But sometimes an artist can say in a few lyrics more than a preacher can say in a whole sermon. So, fellow peacemakers, I'm going to let Caleb have the last word on God's gift of peace.
Peace. I heard a rapper say that I don't want no problems. I actually think they're right, cause I don't like the drama. Some will call it an oasis, others say nirvana. Either way, my soul is heavy and I'm trying to find it. Yeah. Cause nobody wanna be civil, but it seems like civil war can happen any minute. People in desperation when they get pushed to the limit. Jesus said he bring peace, but the peace he talking is different. Yeah. Cause we all looking for peace and quiet. But some of us confuse peace with quiet. Just because things are quiet doesn't mean no conflict. Things may have to get louder if we're being honest. And that's where many are afraid to go. Real peace is where the truth can come and make a home. In order to do right, you gotta face the wrong. So instead of saying peace, I'ma say shalom. Yeah, shalom is probably better. Shalom is everything working exactly how God intended. It's pointing out all the evil and bleeding what's been oppressive, recovering what was lost and then bringing it to potential. Yeah, see, God created this life to flourish. So if you gon' fight, make sure you fight with purpose. You gon' find what you need if your life is searching. But best believe you gon' have to learn to fly with turbulence. See, Jesus said he would bring shalom, taking everything that's broken and make it whole. That's spiritual, physical, and relational. What a beauty to behold, we are fully known. Yeah. So go and be a peacemaker, but it'll cost us something, this isn't cheap labor. Starting petty arguments, nah, I'll see you later. Ain't no time for that, we gotta prepare to meet the maker. Yeah. Until then, I'm praying for peace. It's my prayer for the church and the same for the streets. Not too long ago, I was living dangerously, but my God specializes in taming the beast. So close your eyes and view the blessing of when this broken world gets glued to heaven. No more studying war, there's a new obsession, and every useless weapon gets used for mending, yeah. But yet and still the blade is sharp. Never mind what you may have thought, this ain't for the faint of heart. So break apart from the pain and start chasing a greater cause. The grace of God is the type of peace we all been praying for. I say peace, but shalom is probably better. Shalom is everything working exactly how God intended. It's pointing out all the evil and bleeding what's been oppressive, recovering what was lost and then bringing it to potential. I say peace, but shalom is probably better. Shalom is everything working exactly how God intended, and pointing out all the evil and bleeding what's been oppressive. One day the lion and the lamb gon' lie down together, amen. But shalom is probably better.